How are you? Very good. So today we start this series on covenant. Everyone say covenant. So today I am in teaching mode, which means basically I've got to be sensible. Okay, we won't be sensible then. Oh, come on. Are you okay? You all right out there? Good. All right. So we're going to look at this new series, and I've got some things to bring today. Today is going to be some simple teaching. I want to bring some understanding. You know, very often we need to go back to base. We need to just look at some things and bring some understanding of where we are or maybe where we should be. And so I'm privileged to do that and open this series up called Covenant this morning. And then my friend Steve Matthew, our friend Steve Matthew, will be here next week. You'll be pleased to know, and he's going to be speaking into this as well. And so it's about covenant. And I want to just start by saying thank you to my good friend Mike Breen, who's helped me with some understanding in this, and a guy called Greg Boyd, who I've read his stuff, and it's been so helpful in bringing some understanding to this. So I want to start by just explaining, maybe through a story, some things that I want to share with you this morning. So we'll call them Sandra and John. Sandra, it's not their real names, but here we go. Sandra and John had been married for about 10 years, and to be honest, their marriage wasn't that great. And for a good number of years, it had deteriorated, and John in the relationship had said to Sandra many times, you know, Sandra, we need to go and get some help. We can't do this on our own. We're kind of playing at this, and it's not happening for us, and I think we really need to go together and get some help. And every time he would suggest that, Sandra would always come back to him with the same argument. She'd say, John, nearly 10 years ago, we stood and we marched down the aisle and we said our vows to each other, and I've even got the legal document to prove it. And so we just need to get on with it. And you know how it is if this is your story as well. The problem is that very often we just don't get on with it. And their lives began to deteriorate even further. Both of them churchgoers, both of them believers. They went to this particular church, and eventually John got so fed up that nothing was happening and their relationship seemed to be falling apart that he went to his leader and said, can I just have some time with you? And so the guy sat with him and spoke with him, and he said, you know what, I've considered leaving Sandra. That's where it's got to. I've kind of had enough, and there seems to be no forward movement in our relationship, and she doesn't want to know, and we can't move forward, and so I've come to see you as a last-ditch attempt to try and help us. Maybe you could help her. So he went home and told Sandra that he'd been to see the leader, and she wasn't happy, and they went to their church community the following Sunday, and she'd refused to see the leader with her husband to get help, and always pull back to this day that they got married, and that's the contract, and so we've just got to get on with it kind of business. And the leader caught them on the way out on that particular Sunday morning. She wasn't particularly keen on speaking with him on this matter, and told him so. And so he said to her, Sandra, you need to understand something here, that John is ready to leave you. And at that moment, she almost with a chuckle in her voice said, he'll never leave me. He's a man of value. He's a man of integrity. He knows his vows. He knows the legal binding contract that we have together. How would he ever leave me? That was the last time that she stepped foot in that church community. The following week, John left her, and within a year, they were divorced. And so I say the problem. What was the problem? The problem was that she had an understanding of marriage that was more about a contract than was ever about a covenant. Everyone say contract. Everyone say covenant. You know, sometimes we can think those two things are exactly the same or similar to each other. I want to say that they are poles apart. This woman, Sandra, she continually pointed back to a day that she and he committed themselves to one another, and she totally hung her coat on that. That was the problem. So what's my point? My point is simply this. Many followers of Jesus have exactly the same understanding. That we see our relationship with God, we see our interaction with Jesus as far more of a contract than we ever do a covenant. Does that make sense? That we can point back to the day. For some of you, that was so long ago. Maybe 30, 40, 50 years, some of you 10 years ago, and you say, that was the day that I made my contract. You wouldn't use that word. That was the day that I made that pledge to God. And as far as our relationship goes, that's all we can do. We can point back to the day. And that was the issue in this scenario. You know, the Bible, I want to say the Bible. The Bible is written with two main themes. And I want us to understand, if you like, we could call this almost you're not going to see that, are you? Let's have a go with this one. Can you see that? What happened to my board, my duster? Okay, we could almost say that this is the DNA of the Bible. So if we were to look, and this is like, I want you to see there are two main themes of the Bible, which are like strands that run all the way through the Bible. It's like the DNA. One of them is covenant, and the other one is kingdom. Covenant is all about relationship. My teacher's blackboard never moved like that. They never had the problems I've got here. Everyone say relationship. So when you see the word covenant in the Bible, it's speaking about relationship. When we see kingdom, it's speaking about responsibility. I write faster than my teacher did as well. I also write in tongues. Ha ha, you got that one, didn't you? All right, so something else I just want to say there. So when we look at covenant, it's about relationship. It's about three specific things. It's about Father, or the fatherhood of God. So the fatherhood of God that actually has his eye on us every minute of every day. What a thought that is. The fact that God has that for us. The other thing, part of it, is identity. For goodness sake. Let's try another one. Identity. You can't read me writing anyway, so it doesn't matter that you can't see it. Second thing about relationship and covenant is identity. That God loved us so much that he wanted to tie our identity to his identity. Now that's exciting. This stuff is worth getting excited about. To think about that for a moment. That he wanted it so that our identity would be with his. The reason that he has separated us from the animal world and from every other creature on this planet is because he wanted to tie our identity with his identity. Now that's exciting. So that's a father, there's identity, and the other one, if we can get it under here, is obedience. Is obedience. And the whole idea of obedience is related to our identity. Understand, the Father has got his eye on us. Our identity is totally linked with who he is. And the obedience, that sounds quite heavy. Oh, what about this obedience? Obedience comes from our identity in him. What an awesome thought. So covenant relationship is linked to those things. Kingdom is linked to responsibility, which my friend Steve will talk to us about this following week. And so hear this. God's into covenants. Understand something. God's into covenants, not contracts. Now, it seems simple, but I want you to understand this because it makes a whole lot of difference to your life. God's not into contracts, God's into covenants. The reason I keep saying it is some of us are just used to contracts. You see, in the Western world in which we live in, it's all about contracts. And I want us to understand something about covenants. See, God's into covenants, not contracts. From the very beginning, if you were to read Genesis, you see about Noah. We all know about the flood. We all know about the rainbow. We all know about the covenant that he made back at that time. If we were to read in Genesis 15, we read about the covenant that he made with Abraham. If we were to read a little bit further in Exodus, we read about Moses and how he made a covenant with Moses. And the interesting thing is that today he wants to make a covenant with us. You know, we can look back then at Moses, at Abraham, but the fact is God wants to make a covenant with us. You know, you may be in here for the first time today and never heard that. Never understood that God wants relationship with you. He wants covenant with you. I love this that Boyd writes in his book when he says this. God wants to enter into covenant with everyone. Everyone say everyone. God wants to enter into covenant with everyone who is willing to accept it through Jesus Christ and his sacrificial death on the cross. God wants to enter into relationship. You see, he announced it in Hebrews 9:15. Let's just have that up on the screen for you all to see. Hebrews 9:15 says this. Thank you. For this reason, Christ is the mediator of a new covenant. Everyone say new. For this reason, Christ is the mediator of a new covenant, that those who are called may receive the promised eternal inheritance, now that Jesus, now that he has died as a ransom to set them free from the sins committed under the first covenant. Christ has set us free. And then, of course, there's another scenario in the Gospel of Luke where Jesus is sat with his disciples. And it's coming towards the end. It's coming towards his sacrificial death. In some respects, it's the end, but only just the beginning. In some respects, it seems like he's lost, but there's a victory. And he's sat with his disciples. And in Luke 22, verse 20, he says this to his followers. He says, in the same way, after the supper, he took the cup, saying this, this cup is the new covenant in my blood, which is poured out for who? Poured out for who? Who's it poured out for? It's poured out for us. And so Jesus, God is into covenants. I've said in our society, you know, in our Western world, we fall into the trap of seeing contractual faith more than covenantal faith. It's like we do our deal with Jesus, or we did our deal with Jesus a long time ago. And because everything is about contracts in the Western world, we think contractually. So when we read our Bible, we look at it like a contract. We don't see it in the covenantal way that it was written. Is this making sense? And so I want us to understand as a church community, and for those of you that are in for the first time, that when we speak about a relationship with Jesus and you come in and you think, oh, this is about rules and regulations and everything I can't do, let me tell you something. This is not about a contract. This is about a covenant. This is about a person. This is about a man called Jesus. It's not about a contract. And yet as believers, as Christian believers, so often we fall into the trap of seeing our covenant as a contract. That's kind of how it goes for us. You see, in a contract, let me give you a difference here. In a contract, people place trust in a legal binding force of agreement. It's true. You go and buy something and find out. It's a legal binding force of agreement. Whereas in a covenant, everyone say in a covenant. In a covenant, it's people pledging their lives to each other. Now think about the difference. There's a massive difference. This isn't about signing a piece of paper, however long it was, or just about saying some sinner's prayer, for however important that is. It's not about those things. It's not about just that day. It's not about some kind of contract. It's about relationship with Him. I want us to understand this is a pledge of our lives together. That's why the Bible, everyone say the Bible. That's why the Bible describes it as one flesh. When we speak about covenant, I mean, know that in the Western world now, probably the only decent analogy of a covenant outside of what we're speaking about here is the marriage relationship. Now, sadly, that's gone sour in the way that people see it, and we have all kinds of contracts going on, prenuptial agreements, and sign that paper so that if you go off with somebody else, you don't take my millions with you, and all of that kind of stuff. But in the ancient world, in the traditional, historically, marriage wasn't about that. It was about not contract, but it was about covenant, not contract. And I want us to understand that. So maybe if I can illustrate it this way. I want you to imagine right now that after the gathering today, you go off to car showrooms. You have a nice new car or a used car. And so you leave the church community and you go off and you get there and you're looking across the forecourt, so many cars. And isn't it always the case that the one you want is always 10 grand more than you can afford? It's like, I'd love that one. And wife pulls you back and says, no, actually, no, we need to be looking at these. These are 5 grand, okay? These are kind of more where we're at, or they're 8,000 quid or whatever. And you go along and what is it about young ladies that like the colour of a car? It's like it has to be a certain colour, and you're thinking, okay, but how fast does it go? Or all of that, and you're walking around the forecourt and you see one, and you both come into agreement, or maybe you're on your own and you see the car of your dreams and you think, that's the one I want. Okay? And if the salesman hasn't bothered you already, they come over eventually and they say, can I help you? I say, I hope so. I want a good deal. That's always the case, isn't it? I want a really good deal. And the salesman will always say, well, we specialize in those here. And you look at the car and maybe have a test drive and you see the price on. So what happens is ultimately you think, right, I want that one. And so you agree a price and it's like, okay, what happens from now? And the salesman says to you, never seen you before in your life, says to you, do you know what, Jack, you look like a really nice lad. You seem like a really good guy. And so what I'm going to do, he said, what I want you to do is, this car's 5 grand. I want you to come in every Thursday, whenever you want, on Thursday, and bring your 50 quid in every week until the car's paid for. because you seem like a really nice fella. How many know in this place that that doesn't happen that way? Or maybe it does with the car salesman you go to. It's never happened to me in that way. And understanding that it doesn't particularly go, it doesn't work like that, because it's not about trust. It's not about the salesman trusting you to come in with your 50 quid. It's about a legal binding contract that you sit down and you say, this is the car, this is how much it's going to cost, this is how much you have to pay every month, and if you don't pay, somebody of my team will come and repossess your car. Isn't that how it happens? A contractual agreement to buy your car. But I want to tell you that Jesus doesn't want a contract with you. He doesn't want you to read his word like a contract book. The Bible was always written as a covenantal relationship book, not as a contractual agreement between you and Jesus. That's why marriage is the best analogy. The simple reason why is because it's not based on trust in a contract, but it's based on, get this, it's based on both trust in and trustworthiness towards a person. Anything that is a contract is trust in an agreement, in a piece of paper. Anything that is to do with people is to do with trust in a person. It's a covenant, not a contract. And so the big question this morning as I wrap this up isn't, did you make a pledge to Jesus years ago? 10, 20, 30 years ago, maybe 1 year ago, maybe 6 months ago. It's not, did you make a pledge to Jesus years ago, as much as, are you honoring that pledge today? Wow, it's gone quiet. Are you honoring that pledge today? He says, I round this up, let me remind you of Sandra. She was calling on a legal contract that she made previously, but today her relationship was as good as dead. That's why he walked, people. Understand something, that Jesus doesn't want contract with us, but he wants relationship with us. Someone wrote, life is lived in the present. For some of us, our relationship with Jesus, the sum total, maybe is someday many years ago when we made some response and said, I want to make a pledge to Jesus. But how many know that it's important that we keep health in our relationship with Jesus today? Otherwise, all we do is we get drift. And then we wonder why we come week in, week out, why we're not really getting anything out of our Christian walk, is because sometimes we see it in a contractual way rather than a covenantal way. Covenantal means it's about today, not just about that important step that you made 20 years ago. It's about the covenant that we have with him today.